You have been taught to fear the devil as something outside yourself, a horned figure in the shadows, a cosmic adversary plotting your destruction from some infernal realm. But what if I told you that every moment you spend projecting this figure outward, you are participating in the most catastrophic psychological deception ever perpetrated on the human psyche? Jung discovered something during his descent into the unconscious, something that made him question everything he had been taught about good and evil, light and darkness. The devil you fear is not waiting for you in some external hell. It lives within the architecture of your own mind, and your refusal to recognize this is precisely what gives it power over you. In 1913, Jung began experiencing visions that terrified him. He saw blood flowing across Europe. He witnessed cities drowning in crimson waves. He thought he was going mad. These were not mere fantasies. They were eruptions from the collective unconscious, warnings of the coming war that would consume millions. But more disturbing than the visions themselves was what Jung encountered when he descended into his own psyche to understand them. He met figures there, autonomous entities that seemed to possess their own will, their own intelligence, their own agenda. And among these figures was one that embodied everything he had been taught to reject, everything civilization had trained him to exile from consciousness. The devil archetype in its purest psychological form. This was not a metaphor for Jung. During what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, documented in the Red Book, he engaged in active imagination with this demonic presence. He spoke with it, listened to it, and what it revealed shattered his understanding of human nature. The devil was not evil in the way religion had taught. It was power. Raw, uncivilized, dangerous power that consciousness had split off and condemned because it threatened the fragile structures of ego and society. Jung realized that what we call the devil is actually the repository of everything vital, everything authentic, everything we were forced to disown in order to become acceptable to the collective. But here is where Jung's discovery becomes truly disturbing. The devil is not merely repressed content. It is the ultimate form of the shadow archetype, and it operates with frightening autonomy. In his clinical practice, Jung documented case after case of individuals who encountered their inner devil unprepared, and the results were catastrophic. He identified 3 distinct manifestations, each more dangerous than the last. The first manifestation he called autonomous possession. This occurs when the disowned demonic qualities suddenly take control of consciousness. The person experiences episodes where they act with cruelty, rage, or destructive intent that seems to come from somewhere else. They watch themselves sabotage relationships, destroy what they have built, hurt those they love, and they cannot stop. It is as if another personality has seized the controls. Jung documented that these episodes often emerge during periods of stress or transition, when ego defenses weaken and the shadow material rises with volcanic force. The second manifestation is personality fragmentation. Here, the psyche does not simply experience temporary possession. It begins to split under the pressure of integrating demonic content. Multiple sub-personalities emerge, each carrying different aspects of the disowned shadow. The person loses the sense of a unified self. They become a house divided, with competing voices, competing desires, competing moral frameworks, all claiming authenticity. Jung observed that this fragmentation often appears in highly intelligent, introspective individuals, those who have spent years building elaborate ego structures that suddenly prove insufficient to contain the shadow they have finally acknowledged. The third and most catastrophic manifestation Jung called psychotic dissolution. This is when the devil wins. The ego structure collapses entirely under the weight of shadow integration attempted without proper preparation. The person loses the ability to distinguish between self and other, between inner and outer reality. They may develop paranoid delusions, believing external devils are persecuting them, when in fact they are being consumed by the internal demonic forces they cannot integrate. Jung documented several cases where this dissolution became permanent, a complete shattering of the personality that no amount of therapy could repair. And here's what Jung discovered that still disturbs depth psychologists today. Certain personality types carry a heavier demonic imprint than others. The introverted intuitives, particularly INTJs and INFJs in modern typology, tend to accumulate the densest shadow material. Why? Because these types possess the capacity for deep introspection combined with a tendency toward perfectionism and moral rigidity. They exile more of themselves than other types. They create stricter internal hierarchies of acceptable and unacceptable qualities. And so their devil, when it finally emerges, carries more power, more rage, more destructive potential than they can possibly imagine. Jung documented a case in 1916 that haunted him for years afterward. A patient, a woman of considerable intelligence and psychological sophistication, came to him for analysis. She had been working on herself for years, reading philosophy, practicing meditation, engaging in what she believed was shadow work. She thought she was ready to confront the darkest aspects of herself. Jung, despite his reservations, agreed to guide her deeper. Within 3 weeks, she began experiencing autonomous possession, rage episodes she could not control, calculated cruelty toward those closest to her, dissociative states where she watched her own destructive behavior as if observing a stranger. Jung realized too late that her ego structure, despite appearing strong, was not prepared for the volcanic material rising from her unconscious. The woman exhibited all 7 warning signs that Jung would later codify. Uncontrollable rage episodes that seemed to come from nowhere. Calculated cruelty without remorse, as if a cold intelligence had taken over. Dissociative observation of her own destructive behavior, watching herself sabotage everything while unable to intervene. Systematic destruction of relationships and stability, as if some part of her needed to tear down everything she had built. The emergence of multiple competing sub-personalities, each claiming to be the real her. Complete loss of moral boundaries she had spent a lifetime establishing. And finally, an inability to recognize herself when she looked in the mirror. Within 2 months, she experienced complete personality dissolution. Jung classified it as a permanent psychotic break, triggered by premature devil confrontation. She never recovered. She never recovered. Jung documented this case with clinical precision, but beneath his measured words you can feel his horror, because he understood what had happened at the deepest psychological level. The devil she encountered was not a metaphor. It was an autonomous complex that had gained enough psychic energy to function independently of her conscious will. This is the mechanism that most people cannot grasp, the one that makes devil integrations so catastrophically dangerous. When you begin shadow work, when you start confronting the disowned parts of yourself, you are not dealing with abstract concepts or philosophical ideas. You are engaging with living psychological entities that have their own intelligence, their own agenda, their own survival instinct. Jung called them autonomous complexes. Freud had no language for them. Modern psychology still doesn't know what to do with them. But anyone who has truly confronted their inner devil knows exactly what I mean. These complexes form in the unconscious through a process Jung spent decades mapping. Every time you deny a part of yourself, every time you reject an impulse, suppress a desire, disown a quality that society deems unacceptable, that rejected material doesn't simply disappear. It descends into the unconscious where it begins to accumulate energy. It clusters with similar rejected content, forming what Jung called a complex, a psychological entity with its own coherence, its own patterns, its own power. The devil complex is the deepest, darkest, most powerful of all autonomous complexes. It contains everything you have been taught to destroy in yourself. Your rage, your cruelty, your selfishness, your sexual darkness, your will to power, your capacity for manipulation, your destructive impulses. Everything that civilization demands you exile from consciousness. And here's what makes it so dangerous. The more you reject these qualities, the more powerful the devil complex becomes. It feeds on your denial. It grows stronger in proportion to your repression. Until one day, if you are unfortunate enough to awaken it without proper preparation, it emerges with such force that your ego structure simply cannot contain it. This is what happened to Jung's patient. Her ego, the conscious organizing principle of her personality, was not strong enough to hold the tension between her conscious identity and the devil material rising from her unconscious. Integration requires that you maintain awareness of both simultaneously. You must be able to observe the devil without identifying with it. You must hold the tension between who you think you are and what you have disowned. This is what Jung meant by the transcendent function, the capacity to contain opposites without fragmenting. But if your ego is too weak, if you lack the psychological musculature to hold that tension, the devil doesn't integrate, it possesses, it takes over. And you experience what Jung called inflation, where the ego is overwhelmed by archetypal content and loses its boundaries entirely. I know this is very troubling material. Go to the comments and tell me, have you encountered the devil yet? The signs Jung documented are precise. Uncontrollable rage episodes that seem to come from nowhere, as if some external force has taken control of your nervous system. Calculated cruelty without remorse, where you watch yourself hurt others and feel nothing, or worse, feel satisfaction. Dissociative observation of your own destructive behavior, that eerie sensation of watching yourself act from outside your body, unable to intervene. The compulsive sabotage of relationships and stability, as if some part of you needs to tear down everything you've built. The emergence of multiple competing subpersonalities, each claiming to be the real you. Complete loss of moral boundaries you spent a lifetime establishing. And finally, an inability to recognize yourself when you look in the mirror. These are not metaphors. These are clinical observations of what happens when the devil emerges unintegrated. But here's what Jung discovered that changed everything. The devil is not your enemy. This is the truth that will make you uncomfortable, that will challenge everything you have been taught about good and evil, light and darkness, acceptable and unacceptable. The devil is your disowned power. Every quality you have rejected, every impulse you have suppressed, every aspect of yourself you have exiled into the unconscious contains not just darkness, but potential. The rage you have suppressed contains your capacity for healthy boundaries. The cruelty you have denied contains your ability to make difficult, necessary decisions. The selfishness you have rejected contains your right to exist as a sovereign being. The sexual darkness you have repressed contains your creative life force. The will to power you have disowned contains your capacity to shape reality according to your vision. Jung had a blood-chilling realization during his Red Book period, during those years when he deliberately descended into his own unconscious and confronted his inner devil, face to face. He realized that the devil contains your greatest potential precisely because it contains everything you have rejected about yourself. And what you reject, you cannot use. What you disown, you cannot access. What you exile into the unconscious continues to control you from the shadows. The only way to reclaim your power is to integrate what you have feared most. This is why every saint had to become the devil first. This is why every truly powerful individual had to descend into their own darkness and retrieve what was hidden there. This is why the collective unconscious fears integrated individuals more than anything else, because an integrated person cannot be controlled. They have reclaimed the parts of themselves that society uses as leverage. They have made conscious what was unconscious. They have transformed what was compulsive into what is chosen. They have united the opposites within themselves and achieved what Jung called psychological wholeness. But let me be absolutely clear about something. Integration is not peaceful. It is not gentle. It is not the blissful enlightenment promised by spiritual bypassing and Instagram wisdom. Integration is catastrophic transformation. It is the death of who you thought you were. It is the shattering of every identity you have constructed. It is the dissolution of the persona you have spent your entire life building. And it looks like madness to everyone around you. This is why Jung developed his 4-phase devil integration method. Not as a spiritual practice, not as a self-help technique, but as a clinical protocol for those brave enough or foolish enough to attempt the most dangerous psychological work possible. Phase 1. Recognition without identification. You must learn to observe the devil without becoming possessed by it. This requires establishing ego strength before engagement, building the psychological musculature to contain what you're about to encounter. Jung developed specific containment techniques, ways of holding demonic material in consciousness without being overwhelmed by it. This phase alone can take years. Most people never complete it. They either deny the devil entirely or become possessed by it the moment they recognize it. Phase 2. Dialogue with the demonic. This is where active imagination becomes essential. You must learn to engage with your inner devil as if it were a separate entity, because psychologically, it is. You ask it questions, you listen to its responses, you begin to understand what the devil guards, what treasures it protects in the depths of your unconscious, because the devil is always guarding something, always protecting something you need. The gold is always in the shadow's grip, but you cannot simply grab it. You must negotiate, you must understand, you must build relationship with what you have feared most. Phase 3. Conscious assimilation. This is where most people fail. This is where Jung's patient fragmented. Assimilation means integrating demonic qualities without fragmentation. It means transforming destructive impulses into creative power. It means making darkness conscious without being destroyed by it. This is the alchemical process Jung spent his life studying. The transformation of lead into gold, the redemption of shadow material, the integration of what was split. It requires that you maintain ego structure while embracing shadow power, that you hold the tension between opposites, that you become larger than you were, capable of containing what you previously could not. Phase 4. Transcendent function activation. This is the goal, the union of opposites, angel and devil, light and shadow, conscious and unconscious, the birth of the integrated self, the achievement of psychological wholeness. But understand this, when you reach this phase, you are no longer the person you were. You have died and been reborn. You have descended into hell and returned transformed, and the world will not know what to make of you, because you carry both light and darkness consciously. You embody the union of opposites. You are whole in a world that demands fragmentation, and that makes you dangerous. The devil was never the problem. Your refusal to claim it was.